Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, Rob Words, love this channel. This guy's great. Is English really a Germanic language? I've seen another similar video from Rob Words. I was about to say Wob Words. Let me just watch this video first because I thought it was hilarious, okay?
روز انگلیش که خبرونه خلا گوگه
Police up Pakistan Patan we have to the border in Afghanistan we near after the Afghani OCC border area. We have to the rocket launcher firing after the people 35 wanted to Boston.
Sorry. Oh god.
Is the Germanic language family tree.
I thought that was really funny. I'm sorry if that was a little random. But he sounded really American, but I couldn't understand anything he said. And I thought that was brilliant. Sorry, let's go.
And look, this is the Germanic language family tree. And look, there's English. English has Germanic blood pulsing through its veins, and yet most of the words in our language are not Germanic. What's going on there then? How Germanic is English really? Let's find out in another.
If French is a not Germanic language, if French, all of the Romance languages and I believe German, these are all Latin derived languages, right? I hope I'm correct there. And if I am correct, then what did people speak in these areas like Gaul and Germania prior to Latin influence? You know? And I'm saying this because he included Latin here.
Yet, most of the words
Germanic, French, Latin. Well, French is definitely a Latin-derived language, and I'm pretty sure Germanic is too. And so it seems a little confusing including Latin as another percentage.
Germanic. What's going on there then? How Germanic is English really? Let's find out in another Rob Words.
Let's go.
So the first thing we need to do is to establish what we mean by a Germanic language. And to answer that, we need to go back in time, because the vast majority of the languages of Europe, and some Asian languages too, can be traced back to a single ancestral language. A language spoken by a group of people probably living somewhere around the Black Sea, absolutely ages ago, like 5,000 years ago or more. We call that language Proto-Indo-European, which means earliest or original Indo-European, because its speakers would go on to spread across 2 continents, taking their way of speaking with them. However, as they dispersed over hundreds of years, the way that each disparate group spoke changed, and in differing ways, therefore creating the language families that we have today. For example, in Southern Europe, we have the Romance languages descended from Latin, which in turn is descended from Proto-Indo-European. In Eastern Europe, we have the Slavic languages, which share a common ancestor that's descended from Proto-Indo-European. And in Northern Europe, we have the Germanic languages, all of which share a common ancestor we call Proto-Germanic, which is descended from Proto-Indo-European.
Right.
And in this family is English, as well as Icelandic, Swedish, Dutch, and of course, German. Now I say, of course, German, because it has to be there,
namesake,
doesn't it? They're the Germanic languages, aren't they? But we do need to be a bit careful here. It'd be easy to presume, I think, that German is somehow more Germanic than the other Germanic languages, or even the original Germanic language from which the others, including English, are descended. But it's not. You see, we've got ourselves in a bit of a bind in English, because we've decided to call this country that I'm standing in right now Germany, and the language most commonly spoken here German, using a word that we got from the Romans. But we also call the shared culture across Northern Europe Germanic, making the words German and Germanic very easily confused.
So is he saying that Germanic languages, Slavic languages, and Romance languages are all equally Germanic?
Now, for example, in German, no such confusion exists, because though they also call that shared culture Germanic or Germanisch, they refer to their own language not as German, but as Deutsch. Now, ideally, we'd take their lead on this and stop calling Germany Germany, but call it an anglicised version of what the Germans call it. So, Dutchland, I suppose. But that would make the language, therefore, Dutch. And then what are we going to call Dutch? We're going to call it Netherlandic? I don't know. It starts to get a bit messy, doesn't it? Anyway, I'm getting into all of this just to say that because a language is Germanic does not mean it is descended from German. English is not descended from German. Certainly not High German, which is the proper name for the dialect of German that we commonly call just German. However, English is more closely related to German than many of the other Germanic languages because it hangs off the same branch of the Germanic language family tree alongside Dutch and Frisian and some others too. They're called the West Germanic languages, and we have this family relationship with them because of where English sprung from. You see, before English was in England, it was in continental Europe.
So are Hungarian and Finnish the only two languages in Europe that are not derived from this Indo-European... What does haplogroup mean? I was about to say haplogroup as if I know what that means. I've just heard that. Does that mean that Hungarian and Finnish are the only two European languages that are not derived from this subset that he's talking about?
The form of a variety sprung from. You see, before English was in England, it was in continental Europe in the form of a variety of now long dead West Germanic dialects. And these were spoken in the same little bit of Europe from which languages like Dutch and German would also spring. These dialects were then brought over to Britain by the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Frisians, where they combined to create a language sometimes called Anglo-Saxon, but more often these days called Old English. This is Old English, and to the modern eye and ear, it's basically gibberish. But over 1500 years or so, this is what developed into...
Guys, a little thing I was thinking about yesterday, or maybe this morning, yesterday I think, is that I was reading from like a YouTube short about a piece of graffiti from an earlier English speaker. And to me, it sounded really fancy, you know, like ye old, like whatever. But I just I was thinking, if it's a common person back then who's writing graffiti, they sound fancy to us, but to them, that would have just been normal. Right? Wow, bad voice crack, right?
To the English. But over 1500 years or so, this is what developed into the English we speak today, and it is irrefutably Germanic. No stray French words in here, the occasional Latin word, sure, because the Romans had not long left the area. But really, Old English is perhaps easier for a modern German speaker to understand than even a modern English speaker. It shares the three grammatical genders that remain in German, and speakers of modern Dutch, and even more so Frisian, would also have a better chance of comprehending some Old English vocab than someone who only speaks modern English. Old English is a fully signed up, card-carrying member of the West Germanic language family.
Does this mean that if William the Conqueror was unsuccessful at in 1066, what was he called? Does this mean that if the Normans were unsuccessful at the Battle of Hastings, then our language would be more Germanic than it is today?
It's as Germanic as this German forest that I'm standing in. It was written with runes, for goodness sake. For the win.
Still available.
But if our language has changed beyond all recognition since then, to the point where we simply can't understand Old English anymore, is it possible that English is no longer so Germanic? Well, it's not an unreasonable question. Here is a pie chart showing the origins of all the words in English today. And look, the majority of words are not of Germanic origin. Combined, Romance words from Latin and French make up the majority. However, we cannot change English's ancestry any more than you or I can change who our biological grandparents are. I can swan around in a stripy jumper and a Roman helmet, but it doesn't give me Romance DNA. English has Germanic DNA. Once more, despite its French clothing, English still shares a great deal.
So English is like a German kid who went to France for a bit and picked up French languages, French words, just to return. I'm pausing too much.
with the other DNA.
Sorry.
What's more, despite its French clothing, English still shares a great deal with the other Germanic languages, and more than it does with any other languages anywhere. Sticking with vocab, let's look at the words I'm saying right now. The ones of Germanic origin are in red, and the ones from French, Latin, and elsewhere are in blue. And you can see that the vast majority of the words we actually use are Germanic.
That makes
despite
sense.
them being overall in the minority. Why? Because the nuts and bolts of English are Germanic. It's a bit lol that Germanic itself isn't Germanic. And if we look at basic words, we see how well English fits in with all the other Germanic languages. A is for apple, and that word would be easily recognizable to a speaker of Icelandic, Swedish, Dutch, or any of the others. And then there are the fundamental verbs we use all the time, like to come. Look how similar they all are, although we're the odd ones out because we're the only ones who come with a C. And across English's vocabulary, there's another big signifier that it belongs with the Germanic languages. It bears all the hallmarks of something known as Grimm's law. Named after Jakob Grimm, as in the Brothers Grimm of fairy tale fame. Yes, he was a linguist as well. Grimm's law says that all the Germanic languages, via their common ancestor, went through a series of consonant shifts that made them different from other Indo-European languages, and in consistent ways. P sounds became f sounds, t sounds became th sounds, cuz became huz, buzz became puzz, etc. And English shows clear signs of having been through this. For example, the p to f shift and t to th shift are the reasons why our father is the equivalent to Latin pater, and the k to h and d to t shifts are why our heart is equivalent to Greek cardia. Latin and Greek didn't go through these uniquely Germanic shifts.
Filters.
However, English did. There are other things about modern English that make it thoroughly Germanic, fascinating things that I'm going to get into in a sec. But did you see how President Trump just signed an order designating English as the official language of the United States? A patriotic move?
Not surprised.
Or an attack on multiculturalism? What do you reckon? Well, your view may well have been influenced by wherever you heard the news.
Neither, maybe. Oh, ground news. I'm going to listen through, guys. One sec. Okay, sorry, guys. Back. All right. Yeah, if you can fast forward if you want. Up to you. But I'm going to play through the video. If you're interested in ground news and you learned it from me watching this video, please make sure to use the original promo codes and links from Rob Word's original link, top of the description. That was more difficult to say than it should have been.
But with Ground News, who sponsored this video, you get the whole picture. On that story alone, it's brought together over 200 articles in a single place to allow us to compare the coverage. What I love about Ground News is it will tell you how different ends of the political spectrum are treating the same story by comparing the language and perspectives. For this story, it shows left-leaning outlets stressing the move does nothing to erase the fact that America has tens of millions of Spanish speakers, whereas right-leaning outlets point out that Trump has succeeded where other attempts to establish an official language have failed. It has never been more important to understand the political biases and reliability of your news sources, and the Ground News website and app give you all the tools you need. What's more, their blind spot feature makes sure you don't miss stories that only one side of the argument is covering. So if you want to see how language shapes the news and stay fully informed, go to ground.news/robwords or use my special QR code to get 40% off unlimited access to Ground News like I have.
Use the /robwords.
Okay, let's look at some more of those characteristics of English that make it thoroughly Germanic. One of them is that we don't have a future tense. Have you ever noticed that? We make the future tense using the present tense of other verbs. And guess what? All the other Germanic languages do the same. None of them has a future tense, unlike all of the Romance languages. Here's another one. Have you ever noticed something weird about our numbers? If you count to 20, the teens only begin at 13. Why not 1 teen and 2 teen? Well, this reflects an old system of counting that centered around counting to 12 rather than to 10. 12 is much easier to divide up.
Guys, I've heard this is really cool, that an ancient way, God, I really forget what civilization used this, but it's really interesting that an ancient way, I have to look at the camera and myself over here, used the thumb as like a point, like a counting 1, 2, 3 as the sections of your finger, 3, 4, 5, or sorry, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then you would hold up a 1 on the other hand to show one piece of 12, right? And now 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Now I have 2 here. I thought that was interesting.
And 10. Plus, our ancestors may well have been doing that thing where, you count with your thumb.
That's
In the gaps between... my hands are too cold to show you. Hold on. Use your thumb to count the gaps between the joints in your
oh, interesting. He's going... Yeah.
fingers. You see that? Right. 1, 2, 3, and there are 12 of them. Anyway, the use of that system is why we have words for 11 and 12 that are distinct
That's awesome. I knew about the counting method, but I didn't know that's the reason.
from the formula for 13 upwards. It isn't base 12, so to speak, because from 20 onwards, normal decimal business is resumed. But it is unlike other European counting systems, and it is Germanic. So those are a couple of ways in which English shows off its Germanic roots today, but it also often betrays that it is specifically West Germanic as opposed to North Germanic, aka Scandinavian, particularly when we use verbs like to speak. You see how German and Dutch have similar words, but the Scandinavian languages do not. They use words that are actually related to our
Why is the Norwegian different?
word tell, except for Norwegian, that is, which uses a word that's related to our word snack. Seriously. I guess it's all about opening and closing your mouth, isn't it? We do something similar when we sleep too. Sleep is rather like the other West Germanic words for the same thing, but rather different to the North Germanic words. However, let me show you one more example that rather messy.
I would imagine that the North Germanic words are more similar to the pre-Roman influence Germanic words. Just by logic.
With my point here, because it's going to lead us onto something really interesting. Let's take our verb take and compare it to its equivalents across the other Germanic languages. Do you notice something? All of a sudden, English aligns better with the North Germanic languages, the Scandinavian languages, than it does with its siblings, the West Germanic languages. So what's going on here?
More Viking, to the Viking invasions, whereas more Northern Europe, more established places weren't invaded as much.
Well,
Maybe.
now I get to talk about the next big historical event for English after the creation of Old English in England. The arrival in England of the Vikings. In 793, the Anglo-Saxons are just minding their own business when suddenly some nasty Norsemen turn up and ransack a monastery on the northeast coast. The Viking assault on Lindisfarne kicks off a series of sporadic attacks, which are followed by out-and-out land grabs and the eventual colonization of a huge chunk of England by Scandinavian settlers. And these Danes, as they...
So it seems like English is a big mixture of all of the other European languages.
Often called by the Anglo-Saxons, brought with them their own language, the thoroughly North Germanic Old Norse. In the area settled by the Norsemen, the so-called Danelaw, Old Norse speakers and Old English speakers were rubbing up against one another, often in fact marrying one another, it seems. And so the two languages were sometimes being spoken in the same household, and they started to influence one another, resulting in a whole load of Viking words entering into the English language. There are a lot of Old Norse-derived words in modern English. In fact, I made a whole video about it a while back. But, glorious examples are words like sky and skill and egg and husband. The Viking wind-eye became our window, and to our English shirt, we added the Scandinavian skirt. But the change also runs much deeper than just the names for things. Old Norse fundamentally changed some of our most essential verbs. It's influenced how we say who we are, because are is a borrowing from the Vikings. And to finally get back to my point here, the word take is also a borrowing from
Eru Iluvatar, Tolkien. Also, I want to say, I was about to say, those are some really interesting looking trees behind him. What are these? And then I noticed they're concrete columns. I tried to mix the two.
From the invading Danes. So what did it replace? Well, the Old English Niman, which fits in much more neatly with our West Germanic siblings. The Vikings are also responsible for all of the th pronouns, they, them, and their, which displaced Old English alternatives, meaning a sentence like, they are taking their eggs, is all Viking, baby. Oh, and that thing we do after we've finished saying everything that we have to say, when we die, well, we borrowed that word from the
Eulogy?
Scandinavians too. In fact, if we were still using our original West Germanic word for popping our clogs, we'd be describing all dying as starving. It is true. Look at the German and Dutch words for to die. So the upshot of...
I just wanted to say, isn't the word for thank you in Swedish tack? And so I saw that connection between take. And so almost as if it's a response to taking something like thank you.
All of this is that English, while being a West Germanic language, also has a load of North Germanic vocabulary. And so far as I know, that makes it unique. No other Germanic language spans the subfamilies in this way, even if you take into account that a lot of North Germanic languages have borrowed words from the West Germanic language, that is, English. So a big point of this video is kind of to say that it isn't really possible for one language to be more Germanic than another. However, the fact that it represents both existing branches of the Germanic language tree, there was a third, by the way, East Germanic, which included Gothic, but that's extinct now. I feel like that has to bolster English's Germanic credentials. But any argument that English is more Germanic than other Germanic languages falls down very quickly when you bring up words like these. These are the Germanic languages' names for what we call autumn or fall. And notice how none of the other ones call it anything similar. They all use words actually that are related to our word harvest, which is what we...
Is it because autumn has to do with Roman...
we once called that time of year.
Influence.
English, though, is the odd one out. Autumn is obviously not Germanic, it's a French word, but fall is a Germanic word. However, we're the only ones using it like that. Then there's another thing that separates English from the Germanic crowd, the fact that we don't have grammatical gender. We only have one word for the because we don't have masculine, feminine, or neuter nouns, but all the other Germanic languages have at least 2 grammatical genders, except Afrikaans, which has been living outside of the neighborhood for so long that it's lost them. Not having grammatical gender is not very Germanic, although to be fair, it's not very Romance either. Indeed, it is not very Indo-European. It really is very weird, and yet we manage. However, it may well be that the very thing about a minute ago I used to claim that English could be seen as extra Germanic is the reason why it is so un-Germanic when it comes to grammatical gender. One of the best theories we have for why English lost the masculine, feminine, and neuter of Old English is that the clash of the Old English gender system with Old Norse's gender system led speakers of the new hybrid language to just call the whole thing off. If that's the case, I'm very glad they did. Whether or not it is, though, we know that grammatical gender definitely didn't survive the next big major event for the English language, the arrival of the Normans. When William of Normandy crosses over from France and seizes the crown of England, becoming William the Conqueror in the process, that is generally taken as around the time when Old English becomes Middle English, because a massive change happens in English, brought about by the language of the leadership of the land suddenly becoming French. A whole tranche, a huge cache of French words get absorbed into English over the few centuries where the French speakers are in charge, accounting for the majority of that. The French language influences English in lots of other ways too. However, that's for a video called How French is English.
I've seen it. Great video.
Which I just so happen to have already made. But any suggestion that modern English is somehow no longer Germanic centres around what happens in the centuries after the Normans arrive and the way English is transformed by French. However, I just want to point out something that perhaps doesn't get said often enough, and that is that the French that gets brought over to England is not French like we know today. And I don't just mean that it's Old French, I mean that it is a specific dialect of Old French, the one spoken by the Normans. But do you know who the Normans actually were? Why they were called the Normans? It's
because they were originally from... I'm not sure. He's about to explain it, right? I'm not saying this right, pausing, because I don't think he's going to explain it. I just want to see if I already know. I believe it's because it's similar to the Jutes, Anglos, and Saxons arriving in Britain, is that they also made a sort of enclave here.
because to their neighbours on the continent, a Norman was a Northman, because they had come from the north. And where in the north? Scandinavia. The original Norman was a fella called, not Norman, but Rollo, one of the most famous Vikings of all time. And all the Norman kings, including William the Conqueror, are his descendants. So the Normans were essentially Vikings who moved to France and learned the local lingo. And what's more, that lingo had also previously been influenced by the West Germanic language of the Franks. So therefore you can say that Norman French was a French with Germanic characteristics. That's part of the reason why some of the French words in English are noticeably different from their modern French equivalents, modern French being primarily descended from a dialect from Paris. The best example I can think of is our word war, which is related to the modern French word for war, guerre. In fact, war and guerre are the same word, just one of them has a Germanic w sound from the Normans, and the other has a distinctly Gallic g.
I wonder when we started pronouncing the W in English as w, whereas a lot of Germanic languages use the V sound.
That w thing is also why William is called William, not the typical French equivalent Guillaume. Actually, interestingly, in a few more instances, we've ended up taking forms from both Frenches at different stages, giving us similar words but with w and g versions. Warden and guardian is one example. Warranty and guarantee is another. Anyway, my ultimate big point here is that even the French that ends up doing so much to make English seem less Germanic is a bit Germanic itself. Some of these are Germanic tinged French.
So a lot of the French influence in the British Isles was already a sort of German-French hybrid in the first place. So it seems like English is more mixed with different influences than others.
Words. So I hope that I've persuaded you already that English is very Germanic, insofar as any language can be very Germanic. But I also want to point out that English continues to develop in a typically Germanic way. For example, when we invent new words, we generally use a Germanic formula to do so. When we encounter a new concept, rather than innovate a completely new name for it, we'll often just smash together words we already have to make longer compound words. It's something that German is notorious for, but we do to a less extreme
Dishwashing machine. Geschirrspülmaschine.
extent as well. Think about words like crowdfund, clickbait, or facepalm, and the order in which we place the words we're smooshing together follows a Germanic blueprint as well, with modifiers always coming before nouns. For example, man bun or smartphone. Don't take that order for granted. If English had somehow over the centuries become a Romance language, as some people quite wrongly claim, a skyscraper wouldn't be a skyscraper. It'd be something like a scrape sky, like it is in French, Italian, and Spanish.
That threw me off.
Spanish. Here's one more Germanic compound for you, newsletter. I have got a completely free one that you should sign up to. It's just wordy, nerdy fun once a week in your email inbox. You should check it out. And I'll see you in whatever you choose to watch next. Maybe this.
Clever. I know from uploading videos myself that there's an option that you can do at the end of showing either no videos, a video, or 2 videos. And one of the options is newest video, and another is what your viewer might like best. And that was very clever. Okay. I want to end on a few notes. First, I'm going to glaze Rob Words a bit. I was never a good student, okay? And especially when I've seen other language videos or other language channels, right? Where they sort of go through all of the terminology of grammar, right? And my brain goes all wacky. And Rob Words doesn't do that as much, and it makes me understand everything that he's talking about even better. Not everyone might learn the way I do, though, so maybe that's more unique to me. More unique might not make sense. And the reason I love learning about languages so much is connected to why I love learning about history, is that there are no plot holes. It all makes sense. There's a reason for everything, and I just find this stuff absolutely fascinating. So, amazing video. Love y'all. Would appreciate any comments down below, any answers to my questions, any comments at all. And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.